OB68 brought us Season 2, 4 bans, and 16 pages of balancing, so I can understand why you guys have been non-stop asking me for this drafting guide. There was a lot to test out, and I needed a decent amount of time to do it. I didn't want to make this as early as possible and end up feeding you guys misinformation. I also had a lot of delays and setbacks, so I'm very sorry for that, but this drafting guide will cover both OB68 and OB69, since there wasn't a whole lot messed with in OB69. Now, like always, I based this guide on my experience in higher level games. I was Masters for most of last season, and this season I'm Diamond and slowly making my way back to Masters. I've been busy, but I still know my stuff, don't worry. Now, I do base everything off of high tier experience, so not everything I say is going to match up with the lower tiers. I also play on PC, so not everything I say is going to match up with console. So let's start off with the tanks. Tanks did take some hits, but they're still the most important class in the game. They're going to make up most of the bans more often than not, and they're going to be the things you want to draft first. Going into Season 2, people were wondering if single tank was going to become the meta. It didn't, it is still double tank. Like last season, single tank comps can work out, but they aren't as safe. They're risky, and when you're looking to win, you want to minimize risks. I also want to add that along with the hits tanks took, they also got some buffs. Practically all of the tanks got their CC reduction cards buffed, so you can have up to 70% CC reduction at the start of the game. You want to have a separate build with that card in it in case you have to deal with a BK or another CC heavy enemy. Now let's talk about the tanks individually. Makoa for a long time has been the undisputed best tank in the game. His incredible bulk and ultimate CC immunity with Leviathan, as well as his hook being the best ability in the game, has kept him at the top for a long time. However, he did take some hits. Leviathan health was lowered and his hook projectile size got nerfed. So instead of it having a lot of leeway, it's now a real skill shot. Makoa's max potential now relies on the player being skilled enough to land their hooks often, and I'm gonna be honest, I haven't seen a whole lot of those. At the top level of play, Makoa is still the best tank in the game. Anywhere else? Well, I wouldn't really give him that title anymore. He's still very good, don't get me wrong. He can be very offensive and put a lot of pressure on the enemy, so I still think he's a good ban or first pick. You might not really want to risk letting the enemy have Makoa because there could be a good one on the other team. And like I said, tanks still make up most of the bans and first picks. Now for Ruckus. I think Ruckus is overall the best tank. He isn't heavily dependent on a single skill shot to get value out of him. He's very mobile and he still does a lot of DPS for a tank. He's basically a big bulky DPS. Once he's on you, you're probably dead. Not many things can 1v1 a Ruckus. His rocket talent gives him so much DPS, and aerial assault makes it incredibly easy for him to take high ground control on maps like Serpent Beach. Ruckus isn't really like Makoa where you could let the enemy get him because of how difficult his hook is to land. No, when it comes to Ruckus, you are banning him or first picking him 100%. Anara is still of course the DPS soaking queen. When it comes to tanking hits, no one beats her. Anara can use her abilities more often now since they gave her a CC reduction on a limbs card, and that has proven pretty useful so far. Anara is a good all-around pick and a good ban as well on those tight maps where it's easy for her to wall off areas or cripple enemies, like Brightmarsh. I wouldn't pick or ban her on Fish Market though. The map is too open for her to get really any value. You only want to pick her there if you have no other option because 4 tanks could get banned and Anara could be all you're left with. Khan isn't available in comp until OB70 either, so there aren't 9 tanks in comp yet, so if 4 are banned, then there's only 4 left to choose from. Now Terminus. Terminus got a nice buff to his power siphon. Activating it no longer uses up 25% of the resource bar. You also can't put it down instantly anymore to compensate for this, but that's okay because this little rework makes it so he can have it up more often. He's able to block more things, both protecting himself and his teammates more often. When Term released, I would often say that Power Siphon was one of the best abilities in the game, only second to Makoa Hook. But then the nerfs came. However, with this buff, I would call it the overall best ability in the game, since you don't need to work that hard to get great value out of it, like with Makoa's Hook. It can theoretically block an infinite amount of damage without breaking like a normal barrier. Honestly, I think Term is a fantastic pick and ban. Again though, like Anara, I wouldn't pick or ban him on Fish Market. The map is too wide open for him to really do anything besides block damage. He won't be able to easily get to people and attack them. There are also other maps he can be pretty meh on. Like the push on Timbermill, Ice Mines, and Frozen Guard can prove to be pretty hard on him unless you play him more to the sides and buildings. It is doable though. Now Torvald, who got hit quite a bit. He lost the CC immunity on Thanks Grandpa, and Field Study no longer gives the damage bonus if Bubble is destroyed. In OB69, his Field Study damage bonus is going from 40 to 30% as well. All of this knocked him off of that top pick and ban spot. He's in a better place now. He isn't overpowered, but I think he's still good. Getting a 4-second long bubble on something like a flank is still pretty powerful despite the lack of CC immunity, especially when he could do it every 6 seconds. On maps where Inara and Term aren't good, I can see Torv as an okay ban. As far as picking him goes, you mainly want to pick him on maps where his ult is really good, or in games where you have flanks that could benefit from the bubbles. You could also pick him to take him away from the enemy flanks if they draft those, and he can just bubble whatever the enemy flanks jump on. Now we're moving into the tanks you're probably not going to want to use a ban on, but they're still good picks. First we have Fernando, who is a very good and solid tank both offensively and defensively. He works really well in any team comp, and he can get a lot of value out of a fireball build with Brand, and of course his ult, since his ult counters most of the other ults in the game. However, be careful using him against Term. Term's stun talent can stun Fernando right through his barrier, cancelling it. Khan can also do this, but again he won't be in comp till OB70. Even if you get Resil or use your CC reduction card, Term is still going to make you drop your barrier. Barrack is looking really good, but not enough to ban. Since many of the tanks got their damage nerfed and Barrack didn't, he's back as one of the top DPS tanks alongside Ruckus. He's really good at locking down an area with his turrets, barrier, and his hair trigger talent. You normally can't contest a Barrack who's set up and has that talent. He puts out too much DPS up close for really anything to take him on. He also has a lot of sustain because of his healing station and rocket boot cards. He can have his rocket boots up very often, and his rocket boots can give him a big, beefy personal barrier. If people see Barrack plus Inara or Terminus, they don't normally get Wrecker for the Barrack. But if you see a Barrack with a high level bowling ball card, then you might want to consider getting Wrecker for those personal barriers. Barrack is of course still countered by area denial from characters like Bomb King, but he can have a CC reduction card to make Bomb King's Grumpy Bombs less of a hassle. Now on to Ashe, who isn't worth a ban or pick in most cases. Ashe has the overall worst set of talents in the game. They're all underpowered, and it makes her underpowered. They really need to look at all 4 of them and buff them up because Ashe doesn't really have a place in the game right now. And that's sad because they made every tank good except her. And that kinda sucks because they were so close to making the entire tank class viable. When it comes to picking her, you only really want to do it when you have to. Like if 4 tanks are banned and Ashe is all that's left, or if you're stuck picking between her, Inara, and Term on something like Fish Market. When it comes to picking her talents, if it's a map where you need the range, get the Slug talent. If it's a map where you don't need the range, or you need more COD spread by having the AoE, pick Rally here. You could pick Fortress Breaker if they don't have a good Wrecker character on their team, but that's rare because many of the DPS characters are good with Wrecker, and some of the tanks are as well. Now on to the damages. Cassie is the best. They nerfed her impulse damage, so instead of doing 1480 instantly, you do 1380 instantly. It's still overpowered and needs to be nerfed. There needs to be a lockout that makes it so you can't fire impulse while firing an arrow. That instant burst is too good, and you can get impulse back very easily through cards. Cassie is a ban or even a first pick. Cassie's only real counter is Ashe, who is the worst of the tanks, so dealing with her can prove difficult. A sniper can constantly tag her from a distance where it's harder for her to land her arrows and impulse, but outside of that there isn't a whole lot that deals with her unless you bait out the impulse or block it. Bomb King is still one of the best damages, and he still is the best blaster. He lost some health and some cooldown reduction on his Grumpy Bomb, but he is still the AoE monster that he's always been. A good one could tear up anything, and there aren't really many situations where he's bad. He does struggle against long distance characters on long distance maps since they can easily outpoke him, and he suffers from Cassie instantly deleting him like anyone would, but that's really it. Both the snipers are still really good. Kanessa got some nerfs to her teleport spam in both updates, and Strix lost some pistol damage and reveal range, but his reveal now reveals to the whole team, so for the most part I'd say both snipers are still in a great spot. There aren't too many maps where they're bad on, only Bright Marsh and Jaguar. Every other map is a good option for them, and they could put in a lot of work. There are of course ways to work around snipers by using certain areas of the map to your advantage, but that doesn't really take away from how good they are right now. Then there's Leon and Shaolin, and they're basically in the same spot they've always been. Both are very good direct damage DPS characters that can be used in a variety of comps on really any map. Leon can easily hit small mobile targets with her accurate hit scan, and of course her auto-aim abilities, and her ult can allow her to win nearly any 1v1 duel. They also gave her a card that makes it so hits with her weapon can lower the cooldown of Valor. You can pair this with Swiftblade to make it so you can use both your Valor and Grace more often, and that leads to more damage output. Shaolin can take on basically any flank with ease, and he can get a lot of burst with his Desert Shadow or even Explosive Arrow talents. He can even have Desert Shadow up a lot more now thanks to the reset card they gave him for Withdraw, where he gets it back after dropping below a percentage of his max health. Now I have seen some Shaolin bans, and honestly if you're planning on running flanks, it's not a bad idea, because that's one of their biggest counters gone. Now Drogoz and Willow. Both got some buffs. Drogos' hitbox is 30% smaller, and Willow can nullify all healing with Dead Zone once again. Neither of them are as good as BK though, and honestly if I had to pick between Willow and Drogoz, I'd say Willow is probably better more often. The Dead Zone gives her more value than him, and Drogoz has to deal with so much hit scan in the game. Willow only really worries about hit scan during her ult because Flutter doesn't really put her in the air like Thrust and Boost does for Drogoz. Willow is viable but not a priority pick or anything. I wouldn't pick Willow just to counter healing though because they can always leave the Dead Zone and there is Cauterize in the game. Willow's Dead Zone is better off being used to counter Death Ball comps or characters that have a lot of area control. Like Inara, who uses her bulk, walls, and cripple to control an area. Well, not only her bonus healing is negated, but her whole purpose is negated because then Inara has to leave the area you dead zoned or die. Dead zoning Barrack's setup is also good because he loses both the sustain from his turrets and his healer, so suddenly his setup isn't as safe. Khan again isn't out yet, but Willow will also be a powerful counter to him, and we'll talk about that more in OB70. Victor took a hit but also got some love. He lost his bonus damage on his first 4 bullets and the bonus damage his rifle gets on targets hit by his nade, so he did lose his burst. They did up his damage to compensate, and in OB69 he gets a damage falloff buff so he can still put out some great DPS. I don't think he's top tier or anything, but he's a solid pick, and on maps like Ice Mines and Frog Isle, his grenade talent makes him really good since teams are forced to stay together on those maps. Tyra got better, but that's mainly because some of the things Tyra counters came back into viability, like Terminus and Barrack. When Term puts up his Power Siphon, a well-placed firebomb forces him to put it down in order to escape. Also when Barrack sets up, Tyra can throw her firebomb on his setup, forcing him to abandon it. His area control is countered heavily by her firebomb's area denial. So Tyra does have more of a place in the game than before, but Tyra is also still inferior to most characters in most situations. Vivian. Don't pick her, there's no reason to. Sapper rounds are great and all, but Vivian is very easy to counter, and the slightest mistake in where you place yourself can cost you everything. Vivian is simply outclassed in too many ways by too many characters. Now for support. Guys, every support is viable, it finally happened, they did it! The class could be a bit more balanced, but the fact that everyone is viable is amazing. Now even though everyone is viable, some are still better than others. Maldamba and Ceres are the top 2 supports right now, followed closely by Genos. Basically you can't go wrong with any of these 3. If you can't play Maldamba, you can either pick Ceres or Genos and do fine. If you can't play support, then you can just pick Genos and do fine because he's very safe and he's arguably the easiest character in the entire game. Now what about Ying? Ying is viable but not ideal. Ying can put out a lot of healing with lifelike, but the downside is that Ying can't pick who to heal and when to heal them. It is all automatic, so you can't save your teammates in clutch moments like the other 3 can. Ideally, you do want the first 3 I talked about, but if you were to pick Ying, or one of your teammates were to, you wouldn't really lose because of it, because Ying can definitely sustain a team on her own. All you have to do is play around the illusions more, instead of relying on somebody to heal you themselves. Then there's the off healers. Nothing is really all that different here. Off healers often can't sustain a team on their own, so you pair them with another off healer or a main healer. Running them solo isn't a good idea unless you and your team get lucky. They're also all good for the same reason as before. Pip can be ran as a pseudo blaster and can put out a lot of damage. Grok's totem can quickly heal up allies and give them CC immunity. With Khan coming though, you might see Grok start to fall off a bit, but for now his CC immune totem is still good. However, with Ying and Barrack back in the meta, he can also counter them with Maelstrom since he can bounce his pulse off of their deployables for easy damage. Grover got a buff in OB69 that makes it so he can heal through walls, and that's pretty good. He can also put out some solid healing with Efflorescence while also crippling mobile targets and getting off some decent damage. Now let's look at the flanks, who are basically the bane of the lower tiers. Most of the lower tier bands are flanks, and again, that really is a waste. With good awareness, flanks lose a lot of their power. Flanks are only ever really good if you let them sneak up on you. So the best flanks right now are Xin and Andro. I think Andro is potentially the best thanks to all his buffs he received, but that relies on somebody being really good with Andro, and that of course isn't too common. Xin I'd consider the best overall because he is much easier to play, and you can still get a lot of value out of him thanks to his survivability. Xin is honestly the only flank I can understand being banned. He can be dealt with, he isn't incredibly overwhelming or anything, but he can force a lot of attention, and that can buy his teammates a lot of time. I don't think he's a better ban than Cassie or the tanks, and I wouldn't call him a first pick either though. Then there's flanks like Eevee, Buck, Mowgli, and Maeve, that aren't that bad but aren't ideal either. They're mid-tier flanks. A good Eevee can be really annoying and put in a good amount of work, but her skill requirement compared to her reward is off. Other flanks are just more or as rewarding for less work. Buck still has great self-sustain, but it can all be cauterized away. Buck is powerful early game, and that power starts to fall off as the game goes on. Mowgli is still okay, but still suffers from a lot of the problems that have been with her since her release. Her only good talent is Toot, and her hitbox is massive, and because of that, Mowgli can be bursted down very easily. Most of the DPS characters counter her, even the snipers. Mowgli is the only flank countered by snipers, think about that! As for Maeve, Maeve got a bit harder to kill thanks to her damage reduction card. But her lack of base kit damage forces you to pick Street Justice to compensate for it, and in turn lowers her overall versatility. At the bottom we have Lex and Skye. Lex is way better than Skye, don't get me wrong, but he's honestly outclassed by every other flank. He's fast and all, yeah, but that doesn't really save him from people with good aim like healing can early game, or damage immunity can all the time. Skye is of course hard countered by an item, so you know picking her is a total gamble, don't do it. Okay, so I nearly forgot about Talus, but thankfully I got a reminder before editing this video. So basically with Talus, you kind of want to avoid him right now because he is kind of buggy, and like I always say, buggy is inconsistent, and inconsistent isn't good. His punch sometimes will go right through somebody even if you hit it directly, and his overcharge will bug out if you activate it with no ammo. This is a returning bug, but this time it's a little bit worse. So again, avoid him. And that's it, that's your guide. Again, I'm sorry it took so long. When OB70 comes out, I'll try to put out the next one a lot sooner. Anyway, hopefully you guys found this helpful, and that's pretty much it guys. I want to thank you all for watching, I very much appreciate it, and I'm going to see you guys later. Bye!